Matt, what about any hobbyists, that are looking to perhaps incorporate more technology into their setups now, without becoming overwhelmed? Any advice that you could offer? Or we know technology is the future in this hobby, and is there things out there now that hobbyists can incorporate that you think would not overwhelm them and give them success?
I think every hobbyist from a welfare perspective should have a bare minimum of temperature, ideally pH, and a couple of other parameters, constantly monitoring their tank. That I look at it like, we don't own these animals. We're custodians of them. Mm-hmm. We have a responsibility to keep them in a suitable environment at all times. And
I agree.
Technology helps us do that. The kind of for me, the disposable culture of the aquarium industry might be what kills it. And I'd like, us all to kind of work together to try to help stop that, because I love this industry.
I agree 100%. That was good.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of CVtv Podcast. My name is Carlos and I'm here with Dave Dockin, owner of CoralVue. How are you, Dave?
Doing great today, Carlos. How about you?
I'm doing well. A little cold, but we're doing well. So we got a great show today. I know last week we covered a show on pests, especially Aptasia. And today we actually have Matt Stevenson here, who is the CEO, Seneye, what's ITC Culture? What is you have so many products, but what is the name of the company?
Yeah, so I've been around a long time in the industry, so I've collected a few brands along the way. The company itself is called Seneye Ltd, and we started 15 years ago manufacturing Seneye, which most people probably are familiar with if they've been around long enough. And that came out of another aquatics business I had. So if you want to go right down the rabbit hole, there's a lot going on. So previously to Seneye, I had a business called Biob Aquarium, which you may or may not be familiar with, that manufactured aquariums. I've got one next to me if you want some show and tell.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of small modular aquariums that you might find at the PetSmart or Walmart. But quite unique that they had some filtration built in. And we did a lot of cool stuff that people weren't doing. 2005, we launched a little LED light that was microprocessor controlled, moonlight, daylight. So I've always been interested in technology, and we ended up, luckily, I suppose, selling about 1 million of those products worldwide, those aquariums, and being one of the most successful aquarium companies in the world. And it kind of all started before that, if we're going right back to the beginning. And it was quite nostalgic when you guys asked me, where did it all come from and what's my inspiration? Well, meet my 20-year-old self. So that picture is actually from a newspaper in 1998 in the UK. And
wow.
This newspaper as a piece of reef keeping technology that was invented and released in the UK. And I actually found a drawing of it as well.
Wow.
Oh my God.
From 1998. It looks very much like what we might describe as a Red Sea reefer now, with an integrated sump tank. And yeah, sorry for wafting loads of stuff at you very quickly, but so my journey really through aquatics and starting Seneye was based on the fact that I'd sold millions of aquariums worldwide and people just kept killing their fish. And I thought, there's this thing called the internet. It's in its infancy. There's all these chemicals we know that exist. People don't really test for them because they hate doing it. As you guys know, with your new kit coming, people hate doing that stuff. Wouldn't it be cool if we could just make a really low cost way of testing water in real time? And kind of a lot of technology came together at the same time. So we had, there was modern CMOS technology coming through, small integrated ICs. the birth of the internet, and we started to look at how we put all those things together. And over 15 years ago, it was a bit of a challenge because there was no standardized IoT formats or websites, but we came up with Seneye, an optical way of looking at water chemistry and helping to protect fish in captivity. And that's kind of where Seneye Limited started, really.
So that was the initial vision for the company, was just aquariums and the initial design. That's where it all started.
Yes, so that's where I came straight out of university, started a business building aquariums, and like I say, we sold them worldwide. Ended up with a factory in Mexico, one in China, one in upstate New York, as well as one in the UK.
Wow.
Spent far too much time traveling, which was fine as a young man. And yeah, it kind of blossomed and did really well. But ultimately, I was kind of a bit more into the tech than the consumer stuff, I suppose. And it slowly pulled me back into wanting to be an inventor again and come up with some cool ideas. That's where my real passion had always been.
Nice. So that's the inspiration. So let's talk about, since you brought it up, let's talk about Seneye itself. Okay. So Seneye is you said it was a low cost way of testing, real-time testing of aquarium, correct?
Yeah. So it's only a very small device, a bit more show and tell, as you guys would probably call it. USB device that was also able to attach either through an installed piece of software. Back in the day, everyone had a desktop computer. You can't imagine it now. Or alternatively, we came out with a little web box that allowed people to connect it to our servers, which we now know are called the cloud and IoT devices. But we kind of predated all that. But the really cool, I suppose, innovative step for Seneye was being able to read free ammonia in real time, because the client base that I'd had previously in the aquarium world, that was what always caught them out. It still catches out reefers now and again. We have a lot of reefers who use them as a backup tool, and we still get issues all the time where we catch, collapses of bacterial colonies. They've been interfered by chemicals or something, or just old tank syndrome generally, and things start to go awry. But we also have slowly kind of moved into, with Seneye, more on the industrial side. So we look after a lot of the pet sort of stores, and we also look after a lot of the kind of sea life, what we call sea life centers in the UK. I think you have a lot in the US, and we sell to a lot of them as well. And we kind of look after all of their livestock remotely.
Wow. So that's a huge impact that Seneye has had in the aquarium industry. But if we narrow it down to just because our podcast is more like the aquarium industry, of course, what kind of impact do you think, or the biggest contribution that Seneye has done to the hobby? Is it the ammonia?
So I think there's a couple of pieces of technology in Seneye that are really cool. Because we sense everything optically, we kind of developed a really good low-cost way of looking at light spectrally. And that spilled into being able to produce, as an offshoot of the Seneye, a cheap way of looking at, or a low-cost way of looking at PAR and spectrum. Like I say, back in 2004, I was kind of pioneering lighting, LED lighting for aquariums, and that was, predating the sort of ecotech stuff that was going on. And I really kind of got a good understanding there of how there was limitations around LEDs, like there had been with T5s, but they were becoming, and T8s, but they were becoming more pronounced with LED. So actually understanding your light and being able to understand, being able to explain it to people quite easily was an important step that Seneye was able to provide alongside that NH3 monitoring.
One thing I wanted to ask you is what, especially with us developing a water testing machine, but what's some of the challenges and things that you guys have experienced along the way with Seneye, and maybe how you've overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, so I suppose because my background is in quite high volume consumer products, we've always tried to make things incredibly simple to use. So we don't have calibration in the Seneye system, we have a replaceable chip,
Hmm.
and that's kind of the philosophy I've always tried to apply. People still can get it wrong, and people still do get it wrong. You sell enough of anything, and there's always going to be some failure. Um, but on the whole, the lessons in the experience I've had is make it as simple as possible to maintain and use.
Absolutely.
Sometimes making it simple also presents a challenge because making something simpler, it's a lot easier. It's harder than making something complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely removing, moving parts, stabilizing chemistry so it can be reused over and over again and go backwards and forwards. They're not small tasks, but they are the kind of things that once you've got them nailed down, mean that for the user, there's a lot less interaction required.
Yeah. So what let's moving ahead into the future of Seneye because it's been around for a while. What kind of future developments can you tell us? Are you able to tell us anything, or what's the vision of Seneye as you see it in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of cool tech outside of the traditional aquarium market that will probably come back into the aquarium market. So we've kind of taken a view on what's happening out there, particularly in the UK at the moment, the state of our rivers and the state of our oceans, and kind of gone, we have some really cool tech that can help. The big problem with technology has always been that to get enough density to have meaningful data is very hard because the equipment's usually very expensive and costly to maintain. So we kind of feel if we take the philosophy of what we've done in the aquarium trade, we can apply it outside of there. So we are doing that at the moment. We're doing some really cool stuff in rivers in the UK. Because don't forget, a lot of what we're sensing to do with ammonia for fish is also the same waste products that humans create. So we're looking at the same sort of waste profile, same chemistry in the water, but ultimately doing the same job, trying to keep fish alive, which has always been my thing. I'm a fish geek. Doesn't matter whether it's in a river or a tank or
Hmm.
um, that's my passion is keeping those little things alive.
Very nice.
So you mentioned a little bit about Seneye and how everything is developed or is done by optics, and then you made that segue into the product called PARwise. So tell us a little bit about PARwise. What is that?
Yeah, so absolutely. So we obviously we see a lot of the user data from Seneye, and we found that a lot of customers were buying Seneye purely for the fact that it could do PAR very well and that it could do some spectral data, which makes it more useful than a traditional PAR meter. PAR on its own without spectrum um, is is a limited thing. It's just a number. It's an arbitrary number. It doesn't really explain to you if what you're giving to the animals is useful and if it's in the right areas. I mean, a high green level can have a high PAR, but you're not going to grow anything under it in terms of chlorophyll B or coral.
So I guess the lighting importance. I mean, can you tell us how critical lighting is in our reef tanks and how PARwise can fit into being a useful tool for reef keepers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, generally, lighting for aquariums has come on leaps and bounds, and most people can get a good lighting system above their aquarium. The big problem is, have they got too much light? Have they got the wrong kind of light profile? Um, or why aren't they getting results like their friends, who've got the same light and pretty similar setups? And I think the thing that reefers, if I stop 100 reefers, general aquarists in a store, and I said, what your corals eat, they'd say that food over there or this food. And the
Right.
reality is that their food is light. Um, and we have to stop looking at it in any other terms than there's a dietary requirement for coral, but it happens to come from photons. Um, so understanding what those photons are, how many there are, where they come from, and how we give them over the day is exactly the same as when we look at how we feed a human.
Mm.
I've got these small humans that they call children, and um, if I wasn't careful, they'd eat all their calories in the morning
Oh,
when they first get up, and it'd all be chocolate.
Right.
And they'd get their 2,000 calories a day, and so that's fine. That's how we measure aquarium lights. PAR. It's got 500 PAR. It's perfect. That's the equivalent of me saying that 2,000 calories of chocolate in the morning for my kids is perfect. It's just not that simple, and we have to look at diet to corals and how we feed them in a similar way to how we look at how we feed ourselves. The idea is for a start, we want to make sure we've got the right spread of foods, and that's spectral stuff in terms of coral. Because it's not just about blue. Some corals need a little bit of other parts of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit like those food groups. You wouldn't be healthy if you just ate one food group. Your corals are probably not going to be healthy if you just give them one narrow wavelength of light. But then the other things are just like human food are how we break that food out over the day and what those peak sort of values look like. We eat 3-4 meals a day and snack in the middle. We don't have it all in one go. And really it's about, PARwise was about creating a product that allowed people to look at what we considered the three most important things of lighting for corals or any living creature, which was, what's the spectrum? Because if you don't get that right, the intensity doesn't really matter. So Spectrum first, you've got to be able to understand, you don't have to understand every nanometer precision, but you need to understand the bias of the light. Is how much red have I got to blue or green? And the more points you get, the better. And then in the second one really is the intensity, peak intensity, because you don't want to have too little that you get photo inhibition. You don't want to have you don't want to have too much that you get photo inhibition. You don't want to have too little that you don't kick photosynthesis. So there's this window you want to be in, and it's quite wide. And then the third bit really is kind of almost like that calories per day you have as a human, is how much was the total amount of energy you got in that day given to you, and how did it look like? Was it dispersed evenly over 8 hours, 12 hours? And that's why occasionally people have very different experiences with aquarium lights with very similar setups. They might be running different profiles. They might have a different distance to the coral from the light, and therefore it will receive very different amounts of intensity and photo period. So that DLI measurement that we now have in the PARwise really gives us the holy trinity, we call it, of lighting, the three most important things that allow everyone to get in the game.
Okay, so going back to those three, so you had spectrum, you had PAR, you have DLI, and I think you also have temperature, right? And that's what
color temperature in there. Yes, we do quite a lot of little other features that can help people. With LED lighting, color temperature has become less of a thing, because obviously a lot of them end up being a color rather than a Kelvin. But when I started back in the day, the Rolls Royce was a metal halide if you could afford one, or if you couldn't, a T5 was close behind, and we'd have racks of T5s. So we used to use Kelvin ratings as a measure of the lamp, but what it was really telling us as well was that it had a nice rich spectrum. If you have a Kelvin, you have a nice rich spectrum that in a way matches daylight. And as it shifts into the higher spectrum, it moves more towards, the blue end, and the lower end is the red end. But you actually know you've got a decent amount of all the wavelengths to kick photosynthesis and to create life. Obviously, when we've gone to LEDs, the issue can be that we can have a color, not a Kelvin. You can still grow things under it, but the Kelvin isn't always there.
Yeah. So my question kind of goes back to PARwise has been around for a few years, but there've been other meters in the market also. They've been around for I think a little bit longer. I know I can't ask you to speak about them, but what makes your product different than theirs? Is it those features?
Yeah.
What else?
So I think, like I say, using PAR in isolation can actually be a very dangerous tool. You really need to understand the other two parts equally to get the whole picture. So where our value proposition really is being able to display all of the information as a dashboard. Otherwise, it's a bit like driving your car, but you can choose between having a speedo or a tacho or a fuel gauge. You really need all of them to be able to drive properly. So the dashboard of lighting information we're giving is really to give that whole spread of information that you need to make decisions.
Okay.
I have a question, Matt. A lot of times we get people ask, why do they need to make an investment into a PAR meter? Why not just rent one or share one with a fellow hobbyist? Is it a one-time measurement, or what can you tell us that why this is worth making the investment?
So I think most people who borrow one probably go on to buy one, because the reality is it's probably one of your most important measurement tools in your aquarium.
Mhm.
If you're testing your water regularly to make sure your water parameters are fine, your lighting is going to drift over time. The lenses are going to get dirty. The LEDs are eventually going to degrade. The bias is going to shift in them. You really do need a tool ongoing to help you navigate some of that stuff. And as well, most people are in the hobby because they like buying corals, going out and choosing a coral and buying a coral. And where the kit is really cool is, when you go to the store, if they've got one, they can tell you what the lighting is under that spot in that tank in that store, and you can go home and you can mirror it. And that's you can use your PAR meter to find the best location in your tank to match
Mm.
to that coral's requirements or what's been successful for that coral to date.
Yep, that's great points. Yeah, it comes up frequently, so yeah, that's
Yeah.
great to know.
And I know people can spend a lot on coral. I don't know what it's like
Yeah.
in the US, but in the
Oh,
UK,
absolutely. One little thing could be $300 or more. It's just
yeah. So spending $300 on a tool that keeps it alive is
yeah,
probably not a stupid investment.
exactly.
We always say that when you because obviously with CoralVue we cover a plethora of products, and we always tell people, it's like, hey, you spend, here in the US you spend $300 for a coral that looks the size of my pinky nail, yet you're buying a pump, you're trying to buy the cheapest pump you can find. It's like, that really doesn't make any sense here, but
Yeah.
it's
It is a strange one, but it's always been there. It's always been the same, that most people turn to the tools that help as a distress purchase, unfortunately.
yes.
And, it'd be really nice if we could get people into a position where they were making more educated decisions on what they're doing based on, the welfare of the organisms. Coral are going to get rarer. They're going to get rarer. They're going to get more expensive. And being able to dial in as many parameters as possible. And like I say, light is really important. It's the food of the corals. They need the other stuff. They need the calcium, the mag, to grow. But ultimately, they're not going to grow if they don't get the right light.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to go back to the same question that we asked you for the Seneye, which is the future of PARwise. It's like, where do you see the technology of the role of lighting into the future of coral aquaculture, and how does PARwise is going to fit into that 5 years, 10 years from now?
Yeah, so we already have a new version of PARwise, which I don't think you guys have got yet in the US, but it's coming, which is PARwise Pro. And like I say, there's this triptych of things that need to go together to make you really successful. But what we realized was trying to get your head around all three things simultaneously was actually quite complex. So what we've managed to do is to take two of those things, which is the PAR reading and the spectral reading, and kind of combine them into one measurement. So really going forward, if you have the pro version of the product, The Pro version does quite a lot more for a start, just to make that really clear. It actually measures further down. One of the things we had with the original PARwise was people went, oh, it's great, but we'd really like to get, below the 400 nanometer, start looking at the
Yeah.
near UV, which meant we had to totally redesign our calibration equipment and calibration techniques, which we've done. But we've now fed that into a new measurement technique that we call CPAR, which stands for Coral Photosynthetic Usable Radiation. Okay, so whereas PAR looks at a box, a 300 nanometer box from 4 to 700, and all the light in there, including the unuseful light, is measured. We really use this process in CPAR to look at what's just useful to the organism. So it's much more of a sniper's rifle approach to, parameters dialed in.
I like the description. I like that. Wow. All right. And then, so moving on to the products, you also have another product called Reef Delete.
So this comes out of, I think, my frustration, everyone else's, with pests in the aquarium. And also as well, don't forget, we're kind of experts in light, and we like inventing. So there's when we could start to see that UVC LEDs were emerging at a level where they were really quite useful, we started to look at what could we do with them. Now, sterilization in an aquarium is not going to happen for a little while. The intensity is just not really there yet, and also the life. But we thought, there's this problem that, we've all got these pests in our aquarium, these little patches of stuff that maybe we want to knock on the head before it gets too bad, a little bit of cyano over there, or bubble algae. But often the techniques we use are quite destructive. If we try to use chemicals, we affect other organisms. And the problem is, I often use the analogy, it's like gardening. The weeds grow faster than the stuff you want to grow.
Yeah.
And they're also more hardy than the stuff you want to grow. So almost everything you do try to kill them is not going to be particularly effective. It's probably going to kill the neighboring stuff that you want. So we took a different approach and said, if you can harvest the UVC powerfully enough, we can actually create a beam of light that causes, on a cellular level, the DNA to break down. And when you do that, it actually means that almost all organisms can be compromised. And effectively, if the dose is large enough, they can be killed. So as you go up from sort of bacteria into more complex organisms, the dosage does need to increase. But what you do find is, if you took something classic like an Aptasia, a big one could be quite hard to knock on the head. It could take quite a lot of doses, whereas a little one could be 1 or 2 quick doses and be gone. This product's really aimed at sophisticated reefers. This isn't for people who've got their tank shot to pieces, everything's disappeared, and it's just full of Aptasia. Because it does take some control from the user to use it. We sell a lot in Germany, weirdly, tons of them in Germany, where the reefing community has really embraced it as a way of controlling pests. And I think one of the nice things about it is, because unlike a chemical destructive way of doing it, you don't get this sudden release of ammonia and toxins into the water. Things die back slowly as the DNA can't replicate the cells, and that cycle could be quite long. So you don't suddenly go into having a meltdown in your system because you've killed all this stuff that, we also found that a lot of things like pest and enemies, it'll annoy them and they'll move. And when they move, they're dead easy to get out, because some of these big Aptasias, they drill into the rocks and they become very, very, very good at hiding. As soon as you get near them, they're gone. And most of the kit doesn't effectively remove them without doing some peripheral damage elsewhere.
So right now, Matt, we've been doing a series talking about pests in our aquariums and the different tools that we have available to us to use, be it or chemical. So I guess when you talk about Reef Delete, what makes it different is this the way it destroys Aptasia is from a cellular level?
Yeah.
Is that
So,
just,
so I don't know if you haven't seen one, that's what they look like, and they have this little snoot on the end that you can effectively have a wide beam if you were doing something like gravel, and you can also have a very narrow beam if you were going into the rocks to sort of take out an Aptasia or something. So the difference between it and most other techniques is most other techniques are specific to what you want to do. And often there isn't a technique for some stuff. It just comes back. If you look at something like pulsing xenia, we've all been there, thought it was a good idea, put it in our tanks.
yeah, takes over?
Yeah, and then before you know it, you've got this beautiful tank that everyone else admires full of pulsing xenia, but to us,
Sure.
it's
So weed.
yeah, and you tear that stuff out by the bucket load, but you come back a month later and it's there again. There's not really an effective way of killing it. This does take it out. I mean, if you hand strip it out, kill the base, it won't be there. It will tackle anything in the aquarium. It's just the dosage will change.
Mm.
One of the things that, there was a lot of noise online. I used one, killed a couple of big Aptasias, and I had hundreds of small ones. It caused some breeding cycle. That's all a bit of a myth because no one's managed to successfully breed Aptasia. They tend to cell divide and split off in the aquarium. And so what happens when you take out a big one? A big one's normally in a preferential site. So it's found this bit of land and it's got really big because there's a lot of food and a lot of light and a lot of flow, and it's a preferential site. And what happens when you take the big one out? Funny enough, all the little ones go, there's some lovely real estate over there, let's all move in. So that's why you tend to see a migration. People's immediate reaction was, they've bred, we've got more from taking the big ones out. No, they're ones that are always there. They've just moved now to the more preferential site. The good news is they'll continue to do that. And while they're small, you can take them out with a real easy low dose.
Now, when you say dosage, Matt, what does that mean? Like the contact time that you hit?
Absolutely. So using the device does take some skill. Obviously a larger organism, you need to kind of move around it with the torch, not just obviously it's a relationship between how far away you are. The closer you can get, the stronger the intensity by, it's a very strong, is it a 2 squared log or something? But anyway, you get this massive increase in dose by moving closer and closer.
Can the user see an actual beam of light, or is it's
no?
invisible?
And that's why everyone we ship has a pair of safety glasses, because even though we have safety locks on here to stop someone using it out of water, it's just that extra level of protection.
Absolutely. Right.
Generally, on the higher level organisms, you'll see them react. I mean, things like flatworm will start to wiggle around and not like the experience. Aptasia might close up eventually. But even then, if you move the torch around the Aptasia, you're still dosing it. And obviously things like the real benthic sessile stuff, like, that's not going to respond. It's not going to move. So things like your cyno and your diatoms are going to be much more static.
Yeah. What about clove polyps? Will it work on that as well?
Yeah. Again, the bigger the item, the more dosage it'll take. And with things like that, it's a bit similar to the Xenia. We'd recommend, hand removal and then hit it. Yeah.
Okay.
But the tool's really aimed at the guys who, who've already got an established, good-looking tank, and they're looking at the tool for it's a fine-tuning tool, really, and it's a tool that they can take to numerous areas in the aquarium where they're looking at it and going, "Oh, that little bit looks like it might need a touch-up," bit of algae growth over there. Let's try to knock that on the head at the same time we're sort of tackling a bit of some GSP over there or something.
Yeah. I also like the fact that, Reef Delete makes it so that you can target a particular area. and it also is eco-friendly. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not going to leave any residue of any chemicals in the water.
Mhm.
You know, and like I say, one of the things that we do like about it is you don't get this sudden change in water chemistry that you can with the chemical products. I historically have used things like Kalkwasser to try to take out my anemones, and there's always an issue around it somewhere, burning something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pumps come back on and it blows all over the aquarium, gets on prize
Yeah.
corals.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just spent the whole show about that and how, the pros and the cons of using different chemicals. And we talked about Reef Delete as well, because it was like the cleaner of all of them. And it's very targeted, which makes it great. So, going over we went over the products, but, we also wanted to talk to you about what you think as a company. Um, you said at the beginning of the show that you are a very technical person, that you like the technology. Your main goal is to save the fishes, but you do it and you're taking the technology approach. So I think you're the perfect person to ask you about how do you see technology playing into the future of the aquarium hobby, and how is of that vision that you have, how is your company helping to make that vision happen?
okay, well, there is some new tech in the pipeline that we can't talk about that I think is going to be pretty revolutionary. It's going to land, it's a long way away at the moment, but it's going to land at some point in the next few years. And I think it will be another game changer. It'll be one of those sort of blindsiders people don't see coming. I think in the short term, control of aquariums has just blossomed. It's we've always been a monitoring company, and we've always wanted to stay in monitoring and not get into control. And we admire you guys that do. You do a good job. I think that as time goes on, people will look for a more turnkey solution. They will look more and more for technology to be simplified, for aquariums to be a turnkey, as in, you'll spec up, a box will come and you'll fill it with water and off it goes. Connect your phone and it will do as much as it can for you and monitor and control as much as it can for you. Um, I think, long term, people won't be buying different bits off a shelf. It will become more of an integrated solution. I think in the short term, there's a bit of a renaissance towards, and it might be driven by world economics, but
Mm.
there's a bit of a renaissance towards simplified fish keeping, which
Yeah.
Yep.
probably isn't music to the ears of guys that make controllers, but there definitely feels, from the upper end, like people are enjoying going back to doing more water changes. And it's not necessarily, the monitoring control aspect won't be there, but I think what is starting to change is the kind of people not wanting to change water seems to be disappearing.
Mm.
That kind of Triton method, which I've been a great admirer of over the years, never adopted it personally, but I think there's more going on in aquariums than we can see on an ICP test. And, one of the things I do in my commercial world is looking at things like pharmaceuticals in rivers and eDNA in rivers. And there's this whole world of stuff that we just don't get from ICP testing. But dilution does help to remove.
Yeah.
Complex hormones and pharmaceuticals can bioaccumulate. And we really don't understand any of that part of the aquarium at the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's a whole Pandora's box of things that I think you talk about what is the future. I think that will be part of the future, is really understanding much more about that side of the water chemistry and what that means.
Matt, what about any hobbyists, that are looking to perhaps incorporate more technology into their setups now, without becoming overwhelmed? Any advice that you could offer? Or we know technology is the future in this hobby, and is there things out there now that hobbyists can incorporate that you think would
I
not
think
overwhelm them and give them success?
I think every hobbyist, from a welfare perspective, should have a bare minimum of temperature, ideally pH, and a couple of other parameters. Constantly monitoring their tank. That I look at it like we don't own these animals; we're custodians of them. We have a responsibility to keep them in a suitable environment at all times,
I
and
agree.
technology helps us do that. The kind of for me, the disposable culture of the aquarium industry might be what kills it, and I'd like us all to kind of work together to try to help stop that, because I love this industry.
I
agree 100%. That was good.
We were just talking about the disposable culture of the aquarium hobby, but as one of the ways, but there's also there's global climate, political. What kind of challenges do you think personally the aquarium hobby or the aquarium industry has, and how can we work together as companies to kind of help this?
It's a really good question, and I spent 4 years of my life as the chairman of OATA, the Ornamental Aquatic Trade Association in the UK, but it has a very much international reach. So it works with OFI and your guys in the US. I'm still on the board of directors there, and I think only when people join our organization at board level do they really understand the level of complexity that already exists in international trade in live animals and how fragile that is. How much education we have to do at CITES conferences to keep the trade moving, how much research we have to do to actually understand what the impact is. We don't want to create impact in the environment, but we do recognize that what we do as a hobby is actually a quite small impact on the natural resources. But what it actually does do is it gives a very good value to that natural resource. And if that value isn't there, communities, well, they won't value it. They won't look after it. They won't protect it. There's huge environmental concerns around global warming and what that's going to mean. I mean, there's two ways you look at it. You stop trade in ornamental aquatics because we're trying to keep natural stocks there. But I also think probably in a lot of places we're past the tipping point. And actually the hobbyists are providing almost like a bio library of species that if they're doing it properly, and they're looking after the animals properly, one day they may find that might be what repopulates natural resources. There's no easy answer to it. It's a very complex, very emotionally driven subject.
Yeah. It's a great topic, though. And, for me, I always say in doing this with Carlos, it's like, hey, if we can give something back to help hobbyists be successful, that's my ultimate goal, because the data that we have gathered here is the average hobbyist lasts 18 months in keeping a marine aquarium. And the number one reason they get out is lack of success. They just throw their hands up. And to me, that's unacceptable for the animals and just for the hobby in the future. So,
I absolutely agree. And we have similar stats in the UK. And I think that's where Seneye was born from, really, was can we help really at that base level? We're probably not quite there in terms of a price point, but your mama and pop going to buy kid their first fish.
Yeah.
If we can make them successful, then those people migrate as they grow. I mean, that's my journey was.
Me too.
Got a free goldfish from the fair, Johnny the goldfish lived for years. And then that segued me into tropical fish, and from tropical fish into marine fish. And there's this natural progression, but it does rely on success and passion. And I think, we need to make sure people are successful to make them sticky in the hobby.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about, we got a few personal questions here for you. All right. And do you have a favorite aquarium setup that you've done, or species, fish? I know you're a fish guy. And what do you keep anything at home? I know a lot of us, it's a funny question because anybody that is in the industry, most of the times, we don't keep that stuff at home because we have to work with it.
Mhm.
But some of us are crazy enough to do it both ways. So where do you fit in?
So I used to be the guy that had all the tanks at home. I now have no tanks at home, and I think that's what happens after 25 years in this industry. You kind of you don't want to take your work home with you.
Mhm.
The passion's still there. I mean, circling back on your question, what's my favorite fish? There's a story behind this as well, and it's kind of a happy, sad story, I think. I've got a watchman goby in the office, and you see these stories online about reefers hurting themselves. They get something in their eye, or they weren't careful enough. And I was one of those guys. I thought it would never happen to me. I didn't get something in my eye. We moved offices in lockdown, and lockdown in the UK was probably a bit similar to the US. You couldn't call on a friend to help you. You couldn't, So I ended up moving a reef tank from one office to the other office in the middle of lockdown. And it's a pretty dirty, thankless task when you're doing it on your own. And my hands have been in the tank most of the day, and I got vermited. Somehow I got some vermited snail cuts on the back of my hand. And it's happened loads of times before. And I know they tell you not to, but I always use hydrogen peroxide to clean the wounds out, and never had an issue before. But because of the move, I couldn't find the hydrogen peroxide. And so I just used soap and water and went home. The next day, I had a red line going up my arm. And one of my friends just happened to be a consultant at the local hospital. So I popped round for a coffee, which I shouldn't have done in lockdown, but I did. And when I went through the front door, they looked at my arm and they wrote with a Sharpie on it. So tip for anyone that thinks they got a problem, put a Sharpie mark, write the time on it. And then we had a cup of coffee, hour and a half had passed, and she had a look, and it was another inch higher on my arm, this red line. And she was like, you need to go to hospital, because whatever that is going up your arm. It's going to hit your heart, and it probably stop your heart. So off I go to hospital in a shorts and t-shirt, expecting, a small injection of antibiotics, and off I go to home. I ended up 5 days in hospital, basically being pumped full of all kinds of antibiotics because they couldn't work out what it was. It was a novel bacteria. And then having to have plastic surgery in my hand to take out the necrotic flesh and stitch it all back up. But the reason for telling you all this isn't to rank you out or make anyone even, take care, guys, because this stuff can happen to anyone. The real issue around it was the fish tank basically bombed. I'm sitting there in my shorts and t-shirt, admitted into hospital. One of the nurses managed to get me a phone charger, and through my Seneye, I actually just watched the ammonia level going up and up and up. And there was nothing I could do because I couldn't go back and fix it. The guys, no one would know what to do. So I sat there and I watched this tank die, full of meltdown, and there was nothing I could do about it. And the worst thing was I came back from hospital with a hand like a club, wrapped in bandages, and couldn't put my hands in water for two plus weeks while stitches and stuff were in there. So all I could do was look at this soup, primordial soup that was now there, absolutely gutted. When we emptied the tank, there was a fish at the bottom, and it was that goby, and he is still alive today. And I always think he's a symbol of resilience. And,
that's awesome.
Yeah, and he's not, before that, you'd probably ask me, I'd say copper-banded butterfly fish. But now it's that watchman goby. Absolutely.
He's tough as nails. That's awesome. Okay, looking ahead into the future, and I know you said that there's some things that you can't discuss, anything like that. So anything you can hint, future companies, projects, innovations?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I can talk about is we've got a number of new monitoring bits coming forward, but one of the things we're quite excited about for aquaculture that probably has quite a nice place in aquariums as well is carbon dioxide monitoring. And the reason that it's interesting is most people don't know anything about it. And it's a really important part of the ecosystem. We like looking at gases in water. We've got oxygen sensors now, and CO2 was the next natural step. The reason it's really interesting is it bioaccumulates. Unlike oxygen, it doesn't off gas as quickly. It takes about 4 times longer to off gas CO2 as it does oxygen. So what can happen in the system is you get a buildup of it over time, and it continues to build in system. It's really a big issue in aquaculture that's kind of not understood. But generally, the things that aren't understood in aquaculture also aren't very well understood in the aquarium industry. So I think it's going to be really interesting when that technology does come to light. What does that mean for reef hobbyists? Because when we start looking at CO2, you've got your alk, you've got your mag, you've got all this stuff running just fine. But why isn't your coral growing like your friend down the road who's got similar parameters? And CO2 is a massive driver of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's
Is that going to be in the form of a probe, you think, or is it how will that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll probably be an update to the kind of Seneye technology we have now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's amazing. That's great. And I mean, our listeners, anything that can make them help them grow corals faster, that's usually what they want. Keep the colors.
Do you think
and
that's
the growth.
something far off, Matt, or is it?
We've got stuff in testing at the moment with universities, but rationalizing into a product might take another year or two. But I think it's, like I say, for us, it's one of those Pandora's box things. We know there's a big problem in aquaculture.
Mm-hmm.
We now understand this issue around off gassing, and you can aerate the water as much as you want, but it's not like, watch the oxygen levels, but it's still not going to give you an indication of what's really happening with those carbon dioxide levels. And they are massive drivers of things not happening in the aquarium, not just coral, but other processes as well. So I think, it's pretty niche, but it's one of those sort of Pandora's box things. We might find something that is really interesting.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming in and joining us on our podcast. It was very enlightening. I think we need to bring you back again.
I know. We got to do it again.
Well, guys, thanks for the invite. It's it's evening here in the UK, and it's been a long day, as you can tell. Thanks for being gentle as well.
No, thank you so much for joining us. And again, thank you everybody for watching. Thank you everybody for listening. If you like the show, please subscribe, hit that bell, hit the thumbs up. And you can also listen to us on Spotify. We have a podcast there. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dave, as always. Thank you for being here. Thank you everybody for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Carlos, David. A pleasure. Thank you.
We appreciate you.